All right. Welcome to our webinar today. My name's Sean Work. My associate Chewy Matson was the scheduled presenter, but he's out sick today, so I'm gonna take over his duties and uh, help Michael here present this webinar. Today's webinar is on how to sell more with social selling. Every employee, every deal, every time. We have Michael Idinopoulos from People Links with us today, and he's going to share all his juicy secrets on how to sell on social.
Okay, terrific. Well, so first of all, thank you, Sean and Chewy. I believe you are in listen mode. Thank you both, and thank you to the whole team at Kissmetrics for inviting me to be on the webinar today. I'm a big fan of the company of Kissmetrics. I'm a big fan of your product, and probably most importantly, I'm a big fan of the way that you guys have really kind of created a whole community and a whole movement around marketing analytics. I think it's really awesome, and I'm really pleased and honored to be a part of it in my small way. And what we are talking about today is how to sell more with social, every employee, every deal, every time. And in many ways, the subtitle of this talk is as important as anything else, because I'm going to be talking a lot about repeatability and scalability, the things that you need to do to make sure not just that social happens every now and again as part of the sales process, but how to make it actually ingrained in the sales process so that it is a predictable, repeated part of the way that your team and your company go to market. So let me give you a little bit of background on me. I am Chief Marketing Officer at People Links, and People Links is, well, I think you'll understand as we get more into the presentation, but basically we help companies make social selling easy for their employees and for their teams. We do it through a combination of SaaS software and services, and basically our goal is, as I said before, to integrate social seamlessly into the selling process. Wow. That was a lot of S's. I feel like that should be a tongue twister. I'm Chief Marketing Officer here. I've been with People Links for about 1.5 years, and before that, I was Chief Customer Officer and General Manager at Social Text, which was one of the first enterprise collaboration software companies. And then before that, I was at McKinsey & Company, the big international consulting firm where I was a consultant, and I was responsible for all of the firm's knowledge sharing and technology, or knowledge sharing and collaboration technology. And that was where I first came across what were in those days very exotic creatures, blogs, wikis, social networks, and decided or recognized that they were going to fundamentally change the way people worked. And I decided that I wanted to be at the forefront of that revolution, and that's what kind of led me into the vendor space. So I guess you could say I've been in social business for about as long as there's been a social business category to be in. Other cool things about me, I live in Philadelphia, where it is currently quite hot, but otherwise beautiful. My kids just started back to school today, so if I sound more relaxed than usual, you know why. And I hold a PhD in philosophy, which is something that is probably not true of most chief marketing officers. So that's me. As far as hashtags, as Sean said, we're using KissWebinar as the primary Twitter hashtag. My Twitter handle is @MichaelIdo, which was my childhood nickname, MichaelIdo. You can also use @PeopleLinks, which is our corporate handle. So I'm going to answer 3 very basic questions today. One is, what is social selling? Second is, why social selling? So why should people be doing it? Why should teams be excited about it? Why is it something worth investing in? And third, and most importantly, how do you get there from here? And again, I'll emphasize, when I say you here, I'm talking a little bit about the individual, but I'm really talking more than anything about the organization. How do you make social selling part of the way your company goes to market? So let's start with, what is social selling? May seem like a basic question. In many ways, it is a basic question, but I find there's a lot of confusion about it. So the way I define social selling, the way we define it at PeopleLinks, is really a very simple concept. It's leveraging digital social networks to create and nurture relationships which enhance your sales efforts. That may sound like baseball mom and apple pie, but I think a lot of people have a lot of misconceptions when they hear the phrase social selling, and I'll spend a few minutes clearing some of those up. So social selling is things like endorsing a customer on LinkedIn, running a LinkedIn search when you're looking for outbound targets, liking a client's Facebook post, right? Client has a family vacation at Yosemite. They post pictures. You like those pictures. You create a connection with your client. Sharing your company's blogs on Twitter, LinkedIn, other networks. Studying prospects on LinkedIn and Twitter before a meeting, before you walk into that meeting, knowing who the people in the room are, what they're about, where you might have points of common interest and ways to engage them. Following key accounts on Twitter so that you actually know what's going on in the lives of your key accounts, and retweeting a client. Those are all examples of social selling. This is not in any way a complete or comprehensive list. I don't know if you even could write a complete or comprehensive list, but these are the kinds of activities that I'm talking about when I talk about social selling. Now, as I said, there tends to be a lot of confusion about this, so let's talk about what social selling is not, because I get these questions a lot. It's not delivering the hard sell on LinkedIn. You can deliver the hard sell if you want. Please don't do it on LinkedIn. Don't do it digitally at all. If you're going to do a hard sell, do it live. We're not talking about closing deals on Twitter, right? A lot of people, when I start talking about social selling, a lot of people say, well, do you ever really close a deal on Twitter, or on LinkedIn, or on Facebook? And of course, the answer is, well, actually, no, you probably don't close deals. And what that means is none of what I'm talking about today is a replacement for talking to prospects. You still have to talk to prospects. You're still going to do the close live. We're not talking about a replacement for the traditional sales process. What we're talking about is a way to enhance that process through an expanded set of tools, and to make the live interactions more valuable, more substantive, more meaningful, and more personal. At the same time, it's not a magic bullet for making quota. I am not going to sit here and tell you that if only you spent more time on LinkedIn, you would make your quota. The fact is, all of the good basic blocking and tackling skills of being a good sales rep, knowing your client, knowing your pitch, knowing the value proposition, being able to find good fit, all of those things are still incredibly important. You still need to do them. They are still the difference between making quota and not making quota. But what these tools do is, again, they enhance those processes, those activities. They make them more powerful, more meaningful, more personal. So that's kind of, in a nutshell, what social selling is. Let me talk a little bit about why it's worth doing, why it's worth investing in. Aberdeen Group has done some research, and in my opinion, their findings basically tell the entire story. Reps sell more when they use social. They just do. And if you look at all the key performance indicators, whether it's team quota attainment, 64% for social sellers, 49% for all others, renewal rates being higher when people are using social to sell and to engage their clients post-sale, the accuracy of forecasts being better for social sellers than for everyone else because the others get surprised more frequently. I mean, across the board, all the metrics that salespeople care about, and even more importantly, that sales managers care about, and CEOs and boards of directors care about, all those metrics are better when you use social. Right? It's kind of like that old commercial. What was it? Everything goes better with something. I can't remember what the something is. If you remember what the something is that everything goes better with on the commercial, let me know on Twitter. So that's the big why. Now, let's talk a little bit more about the details of what this really means, because social selling is not one activity. It's really many different activities. And it's many different activities depending on which of the different sales activities you're engaged with, right? Selling is not one activity. Selling is many things. It's awareness, it's lead gen, it's qualification, it's everything that's on this chart. This is obviously one representation of the sales funnel. Everyone's going to have their own slightly different version of this, and that's cool, but they're all going to look something like this. And what we find is that at every step in the process, there are places where social tools and social networks can improve individual productivity and team productivity. So when you're building awareness, social networks are a great place to find influencers. They're a great way to do content marketing and to promote the content that your company and your advocates have so busily created. They can also be a great place to find super fans and other third-party advocates. Lead generation. When you're doing outbound lead generation and you're trying to find people to call, you know, everybody talks about cold calling is dead. Well, one of the reasons why cold calling is dead is because it's been replaced by warm calling, where you're identifying the targets that you're going to reach out to using LinkedIn, sometimes using Twitter, using whatever information you can get your hands on about who is in your target segment. And for inbound, they're a great way to generate traffic, right? I mean, like leading up to this webinar, I know Kissmetrics did a lot of social promotion. We did some social promotion. A lot of individuals did social promotion to bring people in. Qualification is touched by the sales process. When you're qualifying leads, you can go on LinkedIn, you can go on Twitter, you can even go on Facebook. You can see who people are, what they're doing, what they're about, and do they match the profile of somebody who's going to buy from you? When you start to hand leads off to an outside sales rep who's going to actually work the opportunity, researching the prospects before you give the pitch. Like before you get on that first call and do the first demo or do the discovery, understand who you're talking to, and using the tools to identify ways that you can connect with them because, you know, you went to the same school or you worked at the same companies or you know some of the same people in common. Those are all opportunities to make that interaction during the opportunity phase more effective. After somebody closes, engaging with your customers, sharing content with them, tweeting their news, retweeting when they tweet, liking the things that they share, and so on. All ways of drawing closer to your customers in order to get the upsells and the renewals. And finally, the referrals, because of course referrals, as we all know, are a spectacularly good source of leads, but you only get them when you have customers who feel very close to you as a company and as an individual and feel very positively about their relationship with you. So we're touching every inch of the sales funnel. And what that means is we're touching every role in the organization. But each person or each role is using the tools a little bit differently. Right? So marketing is using them to build brand awareness and to bring in traffic and to generate inbound leads, to cultivate relationships with thought leaders and other third-party influencers. Inside sales is using them for outbounding, as I said before, to generate call lists based on target market criteria, and also to qualify inbound leads. Outside sales is using them to research the people that they're interacting with and understand where they can have warm conversations, warm introductions, and make genuine personal connections. And even outside, strictly speaking, the sales and marketing organization. You get into non-sales roles, right? It's an old, it's an old slogan that everyone's in sales, right? It's something that we've all said, and everybody always says it with a little bit of a smile because, yes, on the one hand, we know it's true. On the other hand, it's a bit of a cliche. Well, the fact is that in the world of social, everyone's in sales really means something now, because everyone has social networks. The accessibility and the transparency of those social networks is much greater than it used to be. Everyone has the ability to share content. Everyone has the ability to comment on blogs. Like literally, even everyone in the organization, whether it's the CEO or like the night janitor, everybody has the ability to contribute to the sales and marketing mission of the organization. So across the organization, you have people who can improve sales performance by using social tools. So it's a nice, big, juicy, wonderful opportunity. But as always, there's a challenge associated with it, because when you start thinking through what it really takes to get all of these people using social in the ways that I'm talking about, you really are talking about a whole change program, a whole change effort. This isn't something that one or two people can just do. You can just like get a Hootsuite account and all of a sudden you've checked the box for social. I mean, we're talking about fundamentally changing the way people do their jobs. And as soon as you start talking about fundamentally changing the way people do their jobs, you're talking about process change, you're talking about changes in habit, you're talking about changes in culture. And at that point, you're really talking about change management. So the big question is, how do we get there from here? Actually, this slide says, how do we get from there to here? It really should be, how do we get from here to there? It can be done, right? So this is it's a big change. It can be a somewhat difficult change, but it can be done. Now, like a lot of big change programs, and I've seen a lot of big change programs. I was at McKinsey. I was a consultant there for many years. Like I've done the whole big change management thing, and then at PeopleLinks, we have worked with literally hundreds of clients, mostly large companies, like mostly Fortune 500 companies, but all the way down to some 20-person shops, 30-person shops, on this change journey. And what we really find is it is very much a journey. You don't do a 3-month project and think that all of a sudden you're going to be where you want to get to. It's a continuous improvement project. It takes time, and you take it in steps. So let me talk a little bit about what those steps are. We've developed something we call the social selling maturity model. And if you're familiar with maturity models, the basic idea is we sort of chart the standard steps that organizations need to go through in order to get from where most of them are today to kind of what best in class looks like. And when you apply this concept to social selling, and again, we've done this based on work with hundreds of organizations, mostly big, some small. What we see is that there are certain standard steps that every organization seems to go through in roughly the same order. It's not 100%. It's not like everybody does it exactly the same way, but probably 80 to 90% we see the same standard progression. And it starts with what I call random acts of social, where everybody's kind of doing their own thing. People are starting to try things. The company doesn't really have their arms around it. You move up to corporate social broadcasting, where marketing gets involved. Then you start getting employees in on the act in a more structured and systematic way. you integrate it into the sales process, and then finally you start to optimize behavior based on predictive analytics. As you move up that staircase, that stair step, the value increases, both the value to the individual employee, often usually the sales rep, as well as the value that accrues overall to the company because it's doing a better job meeting its sales objectives. So that's kind of the high-level arc of the journey, and now I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking about each one of these steps, kind of what they look like, what they feel like, and when you know it's time to move on to the next one. So let's start with random acts of social. What my friend Kurt Shaver sometimes calls the wild, wild west. We estimate, based on the work that we've seen, that probably 50 to 60% of B2B companies still fall into this category. And if you look at smaller companies, it's probably more towards the high end of that range. If you look at larger companies, probably towards the low end of that range, which is interesting because in many ways, the opportunities for small companies which don't have big sales and marketing budgets to use social and to derive value from social, in many ways the opportunity even outweighs what a large company can do. But we can pick that theme up later. 50 to 60% of B2B companies are currently doing random acts of social. And when I think about random act of social, what I'm really thinking about is the online equivalent of this picture, which I love, right? So here you have a picture of three people, all of them professionally dressed. They're probably in a meeting somewhere. But in the middle, you've got the crazy socks guy, right? And we've all known the crazy socks guy. Sometimes it's socks, sometimes it's ties, sometimes it's suspenders. But the person who has one little thing that they do that's like the kooky, fun, non-corporate, creative, out-of-the-box thing that defines them. Well, in a lot of organizations, again, 50 to 60%, using social every day as part of your job is kind of the equivalent of wearing the crazy socks to work. Like, it's not obvious to the rest of the company that you're doing it unless they happen to look closely. It's not your job, and you're not really being encouraged to do it. Nobody ever told the crazy socks guy to wear crazy socks to work, but he just does it. You know, it's kind of his little expression of individuality and creativity. Is it a good thing? I don't know. Maybe it makes things sort of interesting. It can be embarrassing if he does something inappropriate. And so a lot of people similarly are kind of worried about social because they're like, well, look, it's sort of an unregulated thing. We don't really have anyone whose job it is. We don't really have rules. We're not telling people to use social. We're really worried if somebody shows up on social and does something inappropriate, but we don't really have any way to manage or monitor that either. So that's where pretty much everyone started and where probably half the B2B selling world still is. Now, the problem with random acts of social is that it's random. That's why we call it random acts of social. It's random. And what that means is that as people start to use social more and more, both competitors doing it, customers doing it, as well as employees doing it, invariably, one day the organization wakes up and somebody, usually in some sort of a staff meeting, pounds on the table and says in their most sort of corporate and self-important voice, we've got to get our arms around social. We need a strategy. We need accountability. We need metrics of success. We've got to get out in front of social. And that's probably where 30 to 40% of B2B companies are today. When that happens, when somebody pounds that table and says it's time to get our arms around social, what we typically see is that the first step towards getting your arms around social is corporate social broadcasting. And what I mean by corporate social broadcasting is you basically say, okay, we've got to get our arms around social. Now we've got to assign it to someone. Who are we going to assign it to? Well, we'll assign it to marketing because, of course, that's what it is, right? Social is a marketing thing. So we're going to give it to our CMO, our VP, our SVP of marketing. Let them sort it out. Let them clean it up. And then what marketing does is they embrace social as a marketing tool. And usually, not always, and you know, the audience on this webinar maybe is a little bit more advanced than this, but usually embracing social as a marketing tool means viewing it as a microphone. And so marketing departments go out, and if they're small companies, they just do it kind of in somebody's spare time. If they're bigger companies, they go out and hire somebody. Usually they hire a millennial, whatever exactly a millennial is. My own theory is that a millennial is anyone who was born when you actually had a job. I don't know how closely that aligns with the actual math, but that seems to be the way people use the word. So they hire some millennial who supposedly is a digital native who gets social. You can't see the air quotes I'm doing, but I'm doing air quotes. And they set up a Twitter handle and a Facebook page and a LinkedIn page, and they do a lot of broadcasting, and they try to attract a lot of people who will like and share and reshare and retweet the things that they're posting. So that's cool. That's a good thing to do. And although I may be sounding a little bit flip about it, there's nothing wrong with this. And it's an important next step in the journey. But the thing is, social is all about people. And if you look at what people really want in the social world, they want to hear from people. Gartner Group has done some excellent research on this. They found that 84% of buyers trust recommendations from other people, whereas only 15% trust recommendations from brands and brand marketers. I'm a marketer, so I'll be the first one to say it. People don't want to hear from me. They want to hear from other people, preferably from other people they know and trust. If you think about, I mean, if you think about it for 2 seconds, it's pretty obvious, right? Like, I don't know about the folks on this call. I personally buy a lot of stuff online. I buy a lot of stuff from Amazon. I spend almost no time looking at the marketing descriptions of the products that I'm considering buying. I spend a lot of time reading the customer reviews. And if I know people who have bought the products, I will spend even more time talking to them because that's ultimately what I really trust. And that is indicative of where everything is going. It's not just the stuff that people buy on Amazon. It's B2B purchases. They want to connect with other people. They want to get their recommendations and their information from people, not from brands, not from corporate mouthpieces. So the whole social marketing thing, as I said, is great, but it's limited because it's not really social. It's social as a broadcast platform. It's not social as a way of interacting with prospects, with clients, with customers. So the next step in the journey is to start to bring employees into this process in a meaningful way. And again, there are lots of ways to do it, but where almost every company starts is with some level of employee training. And already we're now starting to get into a very small percentage of B2B companies. 5 to 10% is probably on the slightly generous side in terms of the percentage of companies who already have formal training programs in place. But But even those numbers, as you can tell, they're on the low side. So companies, once they get beyond social marketing, are starting to look at their employees and say, okay, we've got to train them. We've got to prepare them to do things like have compelling profiles on LinkedIn, follow their clients on Twitter, connect to their prospects on LinkedIn, follow the company page, follow the CEO on Twitter, et cetera, et cetera. Trying to teach all of those skills. And the way that usually happens, the standard delivery mechanism for that is employee training. You get a lot of people sitting in a classroom. Maybe it's a physical one like the one in this image. Maybe it's remote, but you get them into some sort of a training environment where you have a trainer, a consultant stand at the head of the classroom, again, maybe physically, maybe virtually, and take people through the things that they ought to be doing. Again, good thing to do, good step. You're starting to get the employees involved, which is ultimately where you want and where you need to be. But it's not particularly sticky, and it doesn't scale very well. So what we see a lot of is companies who come to us and they say, you know what, it was awesome. We had a training program. We brought in a trainer. We got 50 reps through the program. It was great. The problem is we've got another 2,000 who didn't go through the program. And we're hiring more every month. And we're not even sure if the people who did the program actually then continue to do all the things that we told them they ought to be doing when they were doing the training program. So the next step beyond having employee training is to get into sales process integration. And this is where things get really interesting. This is where my company, PeopleLinks, focuses. And this is the idea that it's not just a one and done. We're not just delivering a training. What we're doing is taking the sales process and weaving social into it so that it's part of what every rep does all the time when they're out there meeting with their clients, putting their notes into Salesforce, scrubbing their pipeline, et cetera, et cetera. We're still at the very early stages of this process. I would say for it to hit the mainstream is probably 6 to 12 months out. We are definitely seeing lots of early adopters, including, some very big companies, companies like Comcast, companies like Penn Mutual, companies like Prudential, who are starting to do this on a much grander scale. So it is beginning. Now, let's talk about what it means. Sort of hard to sum it up in a picture or in a slide, but what it really means is when a sales rep is calling on a client, again, physically or virtually, there are a lot of things that the rep will do. They'll go into the CRM. They'll check the previous conversations. They will update the CRM with their new notes. They'll change the likelihood of the forecast based on the meeting that they had, and so on. Sales process integration means as part of that process, that rep is also taking steps on social networks. And depending on where they are in the process, they may be prompted to do things like connect to a prospect on LinkedIn, follow a corporate Twitter handle. They may be prompted to check somebody's LinkedIn profile before they walk into a meeting. They may be prompted to take an action based on a Facebook post that somebody made. But all of these things are happening based on CRM data and as part of the standard sales process. And with process integration comes standardization. And what you're seeing here is this is just a quick screenshot of our product where certain standard tasks are being recommended, or I should say standard types of tasks are being recommended to individual reps based on the team that they're on what they're selling, who they're selling to, where they're selling, and most importantly, the events associated with them in the CRM. So as you start to integrate into the process, you start to be able to standardize the advice that you're giving to people, and then you're able to measure the extent to which they are and are not doing those things, and the extent to which those actions are and are not driving new opportunities, stage advancements, and ultimately deal closes. So the last step, and this is kind of sci-fi stuff, right? This is a little bit out still. It's very, very hard to find companies who are doing this reliably, repeatedly, but the last step is doubling down on the most effective messages and tactics through predictive optimization. As we start to standardize the process, and as we integrate more and more deeply into CRM and marketing automation systems, we are more and more able to identify the messaging, the tactics, the strategies that are working for a particular market, for a particular industry, for a particular organization. So as I said, doing this on a company by company level is probably still a little bit out, but I will give you just a couple of examples of kind of fun facts through data that we have already generated by analyzing the numbers that our customers are putting up and the activities that they're logging. So as I said before, with measurement comes optimization. This is an example based on a sampling that we did of, I don't even remember now how many thousands of pieces of content that were shared, where we just looked in aggregate at LinkedIn versus Twitter performance. And what we discovered was, by and large, you didn't see a huge, huge difference between the two platforms. And by day of week, yes, there were some fluctuations, except that things look pretty consistent until you get to Sunday. And Sunday, there is a huge difference between LinkedIn and Twitter. It turns out Sunday is a fantastic day to share content on LinkedIn by a wide margin. It is a horrendous day to share content on Twitter, again, by a wide margin. You got to have the data to get at facts like this. And of course, this is an aggregate fact, right? So this is an analysis that we did that looked at a large number of companies across a bunch of different industries. But as you start to get these kinds of facts for your specific market, for your specific buyers, you can start to steer activity towards the things that are really working. What we discovered as we dug deeper into the data was that what we were really looking at was a difference in content shelf life. Twitter, when you post something on Twitter, 80% of the engagement you're going to get within the first 3.5 days. Again, it depends on how many people your followers are following, but on average 3.5 days. On LinkedIn, the number's more like 2 weeks. Again, these are aggregate numbers. They're going to vary a lot by industry. They're going to vary by company. They're even going to vary by rep. But as we have more and more of this data, we can steer reps towards the activity that works. And I'm going to bring us home here in a second. What if you knew where social interactions influence pipeline and deal closes? Right? What if you knew the moments in the process where you can really influence the progression of opportunities through the pipeline? What if you knew which networks offered your company the maximal ROI as generated by closed deals? When is the optimal time in the deal cycle for reps to connect with a prospect on LinkedIn? Should the reps be connecting at all? Or are they going to scare off prospects? Should they be connecting pre-sale, post-sale? At which stage? How far into the life of an account? What are the hallmarks that you should be looking for, and so on? So as you standardize your process, and as you start to gather more and more data around those standard processes, you can start optimizing all these things. And that's really how you get to kind of the maximum value that anyone can get out of social selling. So just to pull it back to the overall framework, the top level of this is still a ways away for almost every company on the face of the planet. That's still an aspiration, that's a goal, that's in the future. We will get there, but it's a ways away. For right now, what you should be thinking about is ask yourself very simply, where on the maturity model are we today as an organization? Are we still doing random access social? Are we still all over the place? Is everybody just wearing crazy socks to work because they feel like it? Or is there some coherent structure and program in place? If you're doing social marketing, ask yourself, are we really involving our employees in this? And if not, how do we get more employee involvement in social than what we have today? If you're doing the employee training, ask yourself, how do we make this part of the sales process integration or the sales process? How do we make this something that is a standard part of what every rep does and integrate seamlessly with our sales processes and our CRM data? And then finally, if you are lucky enough to be in the category where it's already part of the sales process, ask yourself, how do we start to get to optimization? How are we really measuring the things that work and the things that don't? And then creating the feedback loop to the individual rep where the rep is doubling down on the activities that are most effective. And that's the journey. As I say, it's not quick. It's going to take some time. The larger the organization, typically, the more time it will take. But the value increases as you go up the stair step. So don't feel as though you have to get all the way to the top in order to justify the journey. Each step increases the value. Each step all by itself is worth taking. So that's kind of it as far as the standard presentation that I wanted to give. I know we got a lot of people on the line. I know we've got a lot of questions and a lot of content flowing through Twitter. So, Sean, I'm going to turn it back over to you to moderate the Q&A.
Oh, by the way, Michael, thank you. It was a great webinar. I learned a lot, especially that little LinkedIn tip. I want to try that out. All right, so one of the first questions that came up was when we, back in that part of the presentation where you were talking about those LinkedIn versus Twitter numbers, someone asked what year those numbers are from, just for specifics.
Yeah, they are from this year. So that data was gathered late, I believe it was late Q1 or early Q2 of this year, 2014.
Okay, so it's pretty recent. Felipe has a question. He says, I'm starting a company right now. How can I embrace all these concepts, like from the get-go?
Yep. Good question. So when you are starting a company, in some ways, it's almost easier because it's such a small organization. It may even just be an organization only of you or you and a handful of other people. So it's very easy to kind of embrace these in a greenfield way. My advice to very small companies is, number one, you should really obsess over your LinkedIn profile and the LinkedIn profile of every member of the company. Because at least for a while, that's probably going to be, frankly, a lot of your of your digital real estate is going to be your LinkedIn profiles. You may not have much of a website yet. You probably don't have a big budget for SEO and SEM and all that kind of stuff, but you are certainly on LinkedIn. So remember that that's going to be an important marketing tool. Obsess over that. That's number one. Number two, get on social, I would say especially LinkedIn and Twitter, with corporate handles. And really start blowing the heck out of the corporate, or out of the corporate version of the social networks, because that is one place where even as a tiny company, you can look a lot bigger than you are, especially when you start doing the whole ping pong thing between your corporate handle and employee handles, where you start, tweeting and retweeting and sharing and liking each other. You can start to create an interaction dynamic that will make you look like a much bigger company than you really are.
Very true. Okay, some people are actually asking also about the recordings of this webinar. Check your email. We send out the recordings and the slides. You can also check this page. I put it in the questions box for all webinars. We put them there eventually, so you can always see a recording. The next question is, when reaching out to a new potential client via social, how should you start the conversation?
Yeah, so it depends a little bit on the social network, and I would say they are they really are kind of different. So let me just go through a few different scenarios. One possibility is you find somebody on Twitter, and you want to get to know that person. The best way to do that is engage with their content. Share it, like it, retweet it, comment on it. That's what people crave when they tweet, and that will make them kindly disposed to you. Then try to follow that up, especially if you can get engagement back in return. Try to follow that up with an invitation for a meeting or a LinkedIn invite. I do not, as a general rule, recommend that people just send a LinkedIn invite to somebody that they've never met. When it comes to LinkedIn, I always encourage people to send a LinkedIn invite only after you've had a meaningful offline interaction with somebody. And then the third thing I would say is, from a prospecting standpoint, LinkedIn is a great way to find the people that you want to connect to. What we typically find is that connecting via LinkedIn is less effective than picking up the phone and calling the person or sending them a direct email. So even if you do your prospecting on LinkedIn, try to find a more direct, more personal, more human way to engage them before you just send them an email or a connection request.
Okay, good advice. Here's a question from Casey. I don't know if you will be able to answer this, but how much time are salespeople spending doing research on customers on social media? I'm not sure if you have that information, but
yeah, I don't have hard data. I can tell you it varies wildly. Obviously, inside sales reps, especially if they're doing outbound prospecting, I mean, we typically see organizations where outbound reps are spending at least 50% of their time going through LinkedIn to find outbound prospects. So that would be at the high end. At the opposite end of the spectrum, there's still a lot of old school reps out there who don't even think to check a LinkedIn profile before they go visit a prospect or call someone. So it runs a pretty big range. My guess is if you were to look at it in aggregate, I would guess you'd probably find somewhere in the neighborhood of, I don't know, 20 to 30 minutes a day. But that's a total, don't tweet me on that. That's a total guess off the top of my head. Kurt Shaver, if you're on, you probably know the answer, so you should tell us.
All right, well, this kind of works well with our next question by Haley. How do we get employees more involved with social? They either don't think they have time or that it's not relevant in sales. How do we change that attitude and get them involved?
Yeah, that's a tricky one. So I think there are a few different aspects to that. One is just helping them to understand the value, and you can always do, lunch and learns and things like that to just help people get it. I mean, actually, let me take one step back. What we typically see is there are probably 2 or 3 different barriers to reps actually doing this stuff. One is they don't know what to do. Second is, even if they do know what to do, they don't think about it. It just doesn't occur to them in the fog of war, in the stress of the workday. And then the third thing is they are worried that if they do something wrong, they're going to get in trouble. And so what I always like to encourage is try to remove all three of those barriers. So if people aren't thinking about it, create prompts and reminders. And again, this is, I won't go into the whole pitch, but like this is one of the things the PeopleLink system does. Create prompts and reminders that proactively email and notify reps when there's social action that they could be taking. Number two, tell them exactly what to do. Don't make them figure it out. Don't tell them like, oh, you ought to be spending more time on LinkedIn. Like, give them very specific guidance on what to do. And then number three, make it clear that this is something the organization is endorsing, so that by taking these steps, they're not going to get in trouble. This is not a rogue thing. They're not exposing themselves to risk by doing it. They're actually doing exactly what the company is encouraging them to do.
Yeah, I always think that one of the great gems about social media, especially Twitter, is if you have sales reps listening, and that kind of sparks like the desire to be on social, because then you start seeing opportunities and places to engage. So I always think that's a good approach. But
yeah, I agree, and it's a great point. If you go to a rep and you say, if you're walking into a meeting, let's say, with a prospect, and that prospect had just, that prospect had just closed a new account, and their kid's Little League team won the division championship, and they just got a promotion. If you were walking into a meeting with this person, would you want to know those things about the person, or would you rather go into the meeting unaware that those things had happened?
Yeah, exactly.
There is no rep on the face of creation who's going to say, I would rather not know. I prefer going into meetings cold. And that's what we're doing. We're giving them the opportunity to know those things walking in.
Yep. Okay, so Stephanie has another question, or a new question. Where would you place Facebook on the chart against Twitter and LinkedIn?
So I just wrote a blog post about this. Funny you should ask that, Stephanie. I just wrote a blog post about this, and what I would say is, from a sales standpoint, I think every rep ought to be on Facebook and on LinkedIn and on Twitter. But the thing about Facebook is it is, from a B2B selling standpoint, it is a more selective and more specific tool. Especially when you have prospects and especially closed customers who really are friends and not just people you do business with, you should totally connect with them. It's not going to be your entire book of business. It's probably going to be a fairly small percentage. I would estimate less than 5 to 10%. But you should totally connect to them on Facebook, because those relationships are golden, and they are relationships that will continue to pay dividend year after year at your current company, at your future companies. So that, to me, is an absolute no-brainer. I think with respect to some of the other things we're talking about, like how much should you invest in your corporate presence on Facebook, how much should you invest in Facebook advertising, it really all depends on where your customers are and where your customers' customers are. So, if you are selling to somebody who primarily, let's say you're selling to a lot of people who do consumer marketing, chances are they spend a lot of time on Facebook, and they do it in a professional mode because that's kind of their job. But at the same time, if you're selling to, oh, I don't know, what's a good example? If you're selling to corporate lawyers, who serve big corporations on M&A deals. Like, they're probably not spending a whole lot of time on Facebook. If they are, they're not really there to do work. So stick to the purely personal thing.
Okay.
And if you want more detail, read my blog.
So Catherine has just a kind of a quick question. She has a 30, 40 person startup, and she just wants to know if there's any resources online, maybe PowerPoints, for ready-made materials for her staff on presentations on social media to get them involved and get them going. Do you have any places you can point them to?
Absolutely. So on our website, peoplelinks.com, we have a section called Social Sales Training. And we basically took all of our best client-facing materials, which includes videos, white papers, ebooks, and put them online. So that's where I'd steer you.
All right, and I'm going to put your Twitter handle in the questions box. So everyone, you can reach out to Michael if we don't get to your question, and that way the responses will be public and on Twitter. So I think that would be fitting. So we have a couple more minutes for questions. Let's do this one from spiritshop.com. What are your thoughts on social selling in regards to balancing personal and professional relationships? I think I know what they mean, and I think there's a pretty straightforward answer for this.
Yeah, I think I know what they mean too, or at least let me take a stab at it. I think what you're really asking is, hey, I've got these are my personal accounts, and in some cases my personal networks. But at the same time, you're asking me to use them for work. So how should I think about those two competing objectives in the way I use social? My answer to that is, again, it does vary by network. I think you should absolutely view your LinkedIn profile as a professional tool. It's probably 90+% professional and 10% minus personal. Facebook goes the other way, and Twitter is probably somewhere in the middle. As far as balancing those two things, it's interesting. This is a question that we used to get a lot, and we're getting it less and less. And I think part of what's happening is that as people get more comfortable with social, they're sort of realizing that, you know what, we're all people, and as people, we have a professional side and we have a personal side, and we all understand that about each other. So I am not particularly shocked when I see somebody, tweet 4 times about something they're doing at work, and then the 5th time is like they tweeted a picture at the ball game that they're at. I mean, I kind of expect that now, and frankly, it makes the people I interact with professionally, seem more human and more real to me when I see some of their personal side. So I guess that's a long-winded way of saying use the two to reinforce each other. Don't think of this as a zero-sum game where the professional takes away from the personal. It's not a zero-sum game. They actually support each other and improve each other.
Okay. So our last question, I've seen it a couple times, and this is more of a broadcasting question, but I'm sure you'll be the expert to answer this. How many times should you post via Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn daily with regards to daily posts that are not directed towards the company or a person directly? So I guess it's kind of a broadcasting question. What is too much and what's too little?
Yeah, and here again, going back to that shelf life data, the differences between networks are quite significant. What we typically recommend for LinkedIn sharing is every couple of days. I wouldn't do much more than that, and chances are it doesn't help you in any way to share on LinkedIn more than probably every 2 or 3 days. On Twitter, you can actually share quite frequently. I mean, 2 or 3 times a day is not too frequent at all. The one thing that I would recommend on both the both Twitter and LinkedIn sharing is mix it up a little bit. Don't share exactly the same thing. Use a different headline, come in with a different angle. Sometimes your sharing can be a response to something that somebody else has done. So maybe you share something, somebody retweets it, you thank them for the retweet. It's a way of in a way, it's a way of sharing the same thing over and over again, but creating some extra value along the way and avoiding the appearance that you're just a broken record saying the same thing over and over again. And by the way, if you're not sure what a broken record is, just ask me on Twitter and I'll explain it. Some of your listeners may be too young to get that analogy.
Okay. So that's all the time we have for today. So Michael, thank you so much for dropping knowledge on this subject. It was very insightful.
Thank you.
And please come back again. We'd love to do another webinar with you. Everyone have a great rest of the week.
Sean, thank you so much, and thank you everyone for joining.
All right. See you later.
Take care, everyone. Have a good day.